Titanic. Just the name itself, it brings up these huge images, right? Unbelievable luxury and then unimaginable disaster. For more than 100 years, its story has been this mix of fact, legend, and mystery, all frozen in time at the bottom of the Atlantic. But as we're about to see, the story we all thought we knew is actually changing. All thanks to some incredible new tech that's finally letting the ship tell its own secrets. You know, the last distress calls from the ship went out in 1912, but the wreck itself, it's only just starting to talk. So the big question we're digging into here is, what can this legendary ship, lying in total darkness for over a century, tell us that the survivors couldn't? Well, it turns out the answer is literally rewriting history. And this is the total game changer. It's a full-scale digital twin of the wreck. In 2022, a team spent over 200 hours mapping every single inch of the wreck and the debris field around it. They took more than 700,000 images to create this, an exact 3D model. For the first time, we can basically lift the Titanic out of the water, peel back the layers, and look at it from any angle. It's the ultimate black box, finally giving us the hard data to solve a mystery that's over 100 years old. Now, to really understand the fall, you first have to understand the legend. This wasn't just a ship. No, it was a statement. A floating palace born out of a really intense rivalry that was raging on the high seas. So back in the early 20th century, the Atlantic was a battleground for shipping companies. You had the Cunard Line, and they were obsessed with speed. Breaking records was their whole thing. But the White Star Line, they played a different game. Their strategy wasn't to be the fastest, but to be the biggest and the most luxurious. They had this unofficial motto that pretty much says it all. We're not the fastest, but who wants to travel across an ocean vomiting? For them, the journey itself was supposed to be the main event. And so they built a the RMS Titanic was an absolute marvel of engineering. It took nearly 14,000 workers to build it. At 45,000 tons, it was the largest man-made moving object on the entire planet. People who saw it launch said it didn't even feel like the ship was moving. It felt like the land itself was moving away. This massive scale, this raw power, it wasn't just a detail, it was the entire foundation for the myth that it was unsinkable. That whole legend of the unsinkable ship is what made its end so incredibly shocking. But what we now know is that the sinking of the Titanic wasn't just one single tragic accident. Oh no, it was the last deadly link in a long chain of human error, ignored warnings, and just plain bad luck. You know, the most stunning thing about this timeline is just how fast everything fell apart. At 9:30 at night, a critical ice warning comes in, but it never makes it to the bridge. Why? Because the telegraph operators were swamped sending personal messages for wealthy passengers. Just over 2 hours later, the iceberg is spotted. In only 37 seconds, the unsinkable ship is fatally wounded. And just 25 minutes after that, the captain gets the terrible news: the ship has 2 hours tops. It's just a terrifyingly fast fall, from total confidence to a desperate fight for survival. So you see, it wasn't one thing that doomed the Titanic, it was pretty much everything. The warnings weren't just overlooked, they were flat out dismissed. There weren't enough lifeboats, not because of some mistake, but by design. The chairman of the White Star Line, who was actually on the ship, decided to cut the number of lifeboats from 48 down to 20. The reason? He thought they cluttered the deck and spoiled the view for first class. And to make everything worse, the sea that night was freakishly calm, like glass, and there was no moon. That meant no waves were breaking against the iceberg, which would have made it visible much, much sooner. It was just a total, perfect storm of failure. And if you need one quote to sum up the fatal arrogance on that ship, this is it. The SS Californian was so close that night, just 32 kilometers away. It had actually stopped because the ice was so thick. Its radio operator tried to warn the Titanic. And this was the response he got. "Shut up, I'm busy." Phillips wasn't being lazy, he was making money for the company, sending passenger telegrams. But that choice, that focus, led the operator on the Californian to just turn his radio off and go to sleep, silencing the one ship that probably could have saved them. After the disaster, official inquiries were held, and an official story was created. But the most important witness of all, the ship itself, was silent, locked away in the crushing dark of the deep ocean, just waiting to be found. For 3/4 of a century, the Titanic was just gone, vanished. Nobody knew exactly where it was. And in that long silence, myths started to sound like facts. Survivors told their stories, experts gave their opinions, but without the key piece of evidence, the ship, the whole story could never truly be told. And this was the biggest myth of them all. The official inquiries in both the US and the UK all concluded the ship sank in one piece. That was the accepted truth, the story you saw in books and movies for decades. It painted this neat, almost graceful picture of the great ship just slipping into the sea. But it was completely wrong. The discovery of the wreck in 1985 was like a thunderclap. At a staggering depth of 4,000 meters, the search team found the bow of the ship. And then, almost 800 meters away, they found the stern. The Titanic hadn't slipped gracefully into the ocean at all. It had been violently ripped in half. That one discovery shattered 73 years of accepted history and kicked off a whole new investigation. Another huge myth was about the damage itself. The story always went that the iceberg acted like a giant can opener, tearing a massive 91-meter gash down the side of the ship. But here's the thing. A wound that big would have sunk the ship in less than half an hour, not 2.5 hours. Now, because of these new scans, we finally know the truth. There is no giant gash. What actually happened is the impact buckled the steel plates of the hull, popping the iron rivets and creating a series of smaller holes. It wasn't one giant wound. It was more like death by 1,000 cuts. The precision of this new tech is it's breathtaking. The digital model is so incredibly high-res that you can zoom in from a view of the entire wreck field right down to the tiniest details. You can make out unopened champagne bottles, and yes, you can actually read the serial numbers stamped onto the propellers. It's like having a microscope at a crime scene 4 kilometers under the sea. So as technology is uncovering the scientific truth of what happened, there's one last bizarre chapter to this whole story that is really hard to explain. A chapter that feels almost supernatural, as if the fate of the Titanic wasn't written once, but twice. Okay, get this. 14 years before the Titanic even sailed, an author named Morgan Robertson wrote a book called Futility. It's about a massive, unsinkable British ocean liner named the Titan. On a cold April night, it hits an iceberg on its starboard side in the North Atlantic and sinks. And the fatal flaw in the book? The ship only had the legal minimum number of lifeboats, not nearly enough for everyone on board. I mean, the similarities are so specific and so numerous, it's just jaw-dropping. It has to be one of history's most chilling coincidences. And you know, with all the incredible technology and strange prophecies, we always have to come back to this, the real human cost. More than 1,500 people lost their lives. The captain went down with his ship. It was supposed to be his last voyage before he retired. Instead, well, he retired from life. For a long time, people wondered what happened to the bodies of those who went down with the ship. The team that found the wreck in '85, they were prepared to find human remains, but they found none. The science behind it is pretty sobering. At that depth, the combination of extreme pressure and the water chemistry means that human bone just dissolves. Within about a decade, all the skeletal remains were simply gone. But something does remain. The tanning process used on leather shoes makes them resistant to the tiny organisms that consume everything else. So scattered across the debris field, you find these haunting memorials. Pairs of shoes just lying on the seabed, right where a person's body finally came to rest. A mother's boots next to her child's. They are the last silent witnesses, and they bring the massive scale of this tragedy down to an incredibly personal and truly heartbreaking level. The story of the Titanic isn't just a tragedy anymore. It's also a powerful lesson in how technology can basically act as a time machine, letting us go back and find truths that were lost to the deep. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If we were this wrong about one of the most famous events in history, what other parts of our past are just waiting for the right tool to come along and tell us the real story?